Lucas grabbed a copy of Starman from the shelf next to his bunk. Starman, number 81, from Volume 2. It was a near-mint copy, but he carefully pulled it out of his plastic wrapper. He would have preferred a more worn copy to keep this one protected, but it was the only copy he had been able to find. But on days like these, Lucas needed something extra. He needed that reward for pushing himself the extra mile. It was a simple system that served him well, and he knew he could make most things happen as long as his supply of good comics held out. This was Lucas's second year in the treetop house. He called it Castle Jack. Before Castle Jack, he had stayed in a huge residence close to Taman Park. That house had its benefits. Lots of space, closer to other lootable houses and buildings, and near where he had grown up. It was closer to how things had been before. It was also too big, and a bit too close to home. But the main reason Lucas felt the need to relocate was the proximity to them. Staying in the woods, closer to the river, was definitely a lot safer, even though it required more time and energy to survive. But it was secure. Secure enough, at least. The oil in his reading lamp was about to burn out, signaling the end of Lucas's bedtime Starman session. With the last few seconds of illumination from the lamp, he added paraffin to his to-do list, right next to the main objective for tomorrow's mission, to locate the very last copy missing from his Starman collection, The Mist, a special edition from 1998. Early the next day, Lucas woke up at dawn. He tiredly stumbled out the door of his house, greeted by the sound of a jingle bell ornament hanging above it. Lucas had mounted the bell there to function as an alarm, but so far, all it had done was slightly annoy him and vaguely remind him of Christmas. As usual, he had a lot to do, and in his 30-some years on this planet, he knew well that he functioned best in the early hours of the day. Food rations were running low again, so he had to skip breakfast. But as long as he had coffee, he could function well enough to do what needed to be done, at least until noon. He was sure he'd find something to eat on his way to where he was going today. He had different ways of leaving his treetop shelter. One was, of course, down the stairs he had meticulously built while making the house. Then there were the more entertaining ways of departure, the zip line and the rope elevator. He had also a fourth way of leaving, a method he had only tested once and didn't plan to use unless he really needed to. Lucas used the last drops of paraffin to boil water for his daily dose of instant coffee. He got dressed and geared up for today's mission. A knife, a Maglite flashlight, a spacious backpack, a baseball bat, a Glock G19, a bottle of water from his now functioning water supply, and strong coffee in a thermos cup made with a couple more teaspoons of instant coffee powder than the manufacturer recommended. In the beginning, after everything changed, Lucas preferred to use whatever vehicle he could find: cars, motorbikes, and snowmobiles in the winter. His favorite was a Honda 250 dirt bike. It was fast and easy to maneuver between all the broken-down cars cluttering the roads and streets. Everything was busier and more chaotic in the beginning, so he needed to move fast, a lot faster than they did. As things calmed down, traveling discreetly became crucial. He still had the dirt bike ready to go in a shed next to the treehouse. Other than checking on it every now and then, he hadn't used it in several months. Next to it, in the shed, he also had his now preferred vehicle of choice, a rather worn-down bicycle he found in the garage of his former shelter next to the park. The bike was silent and practical, and it was just about fast enough to escape. Lucas cycled towards Healdsburg, the city where he grew up, and the closest city to where he now resided. He had a coffee holder for his thermos cup on the handlebar of his bike, something he once saw and grabbed from a deserted baby stroller in downtown Healdsburg. He headed towards a corner shop on Lewis Road, a place he had once marked on his map as rather safe and absolutely unlooted. Most places in Healdsburg had been looted by now, most of them from when there were more living people in the area. Survivors. But for the last year or so, Lucas was the only living human in the area. That he was pretty sure of. Every time he entered the city, he mapped out potential new places to visit for different supplies he might need in the future. The corner shops usually had a variety of what Lucas needed: canned food, some tools, instant coffee, and paraffin. It took about an hour to get to Lewis Road and the corner store Lucas had his eyes on. The temperature of the air and the brisk smell hinted that fall was approaching, a friendly reminder of what Lucas needed to find on today's trip. He parked outside the store, and it looked almost as mint as his copy of number 81 of Starman. It was as if it were wrapped up and protected by a thin, almost invisible film, kept greasy hands off it. The store had security bars covering all windows, and Lucas knew that the front door was locked. The steel bars had prevented anyone from entering through the windows, and a locked door was surprisingly effective for anyone who wanted to enter a building without making too much sound doing so. Luckily for Lewis, he had spent an awful lot of time watching a YouTube channel by the name of Lock-Picking Lawyer before the internet disappeared in a blink 3 years ago. The so-called lawyer on this very YouTube channel had given Lucas all the knowledge he needed to pick most locks he had encountered on his journey. As many YouTubers did back then, the lawyer also had a web shop where you could order merchandise, and to Lucas's pleasant surprise, lock-picking tools. The lock on Polcari's grocery store called for a covert tubular lockpick, not the type of lockpick tool you used to see in blockbuster movies. This was a more advanced tool for a more advanced job. Lucas was able to get the door open in just under 60 seconds. He bet the lawyer would have used less than 20, but he was in. Polcari's was even cleaner on the inside. Lucas thought it looked like the grocery store's showcase to tourists in North Korea, most likely fake and with hired actors pretending to be the owners. Shelves and produce so neatly in order. It couldn't be right. Lucas was pretty sure this was real, though, but the condition of Polcari's really made him wonder what happened here. The barred windows and locked door somewhat explained why someone hadn't raided the place, but the whole place told a story that Lucas still wasn't able to fully comprehend quite yet. He slowly walked by the counter and the first shelf, loaded with fast carbohydrates and iPhone chargers and accessories. His eyes scanned the sugar aisle for something orange, something that would go well with the last few sips of coffee. And there it was. He grabbed 2 packs of Reese's Pieces, one for lunch and one for later, hopefully to be enjoyed together with a special edition of Starman, in a warm bed and illuminated by an oil lamp full of paraffin. He knew from experience that he shouldn't fill up his backpack with Reese's, no matter how much he enjoyed them. A world like this, with all its obstacles and shortcomings, when it came to supplies and food, also required a lot of self-discipline. A week of living on Snickers bars in a cabin in Clear Lake taught him that last winter. He couldn't even stomach looking at a Snickers anymore, and he had definitely learned that his body preferred other food groups to function well. At the back of the store, Lucas found canned goods that vaguely represented those food groups. He filled half of his backpack with beans, tuna, Spam, peas, and his favorite, mini raviolis. A quick look around Polcari's told him that this place would give him what he needed of food for close to a year. 2 effective days with his bike and trailer would fill up his shelter with food for the winter and more. His quick walk around the premises also told him that there was no fuel for his oil lamp to be found. Looks like Polcari's was sold out of paraffin, which was very odd, considering how fully stocked every aisle was. Lucas looked at the door in the back of the store. He knew from his last trip to Lewis Road, the one where he found and put Polcari's on his potential loot map, that the back door didn't lead to the back alley. It was most likely a door that led to a set of stairs that connected to the apartment above the corner shop, the place where, most likely, the owner of Polcari's used to reside. He knew that behind that door and up those stairs was the answer to why this very corner shop was left in a pristine state like no other store in Healdsburg. Last time Lucas was here, he knocked on the exterior door to make sure no one was there. A knock on the door would usually provoke a reaction from three possible problems. Firstly, wildlife stuck inside a building. No way a deer was able to pick that lock and close the door behind itself, so Lucas didn't expect that. Secondly, a living human being. Could be good-hearted or not so good-hearted, but set on protecting the premises. Or it could be housing one of them. But of course, he hadn't been inside the door leading up to the apartment. Lucas walked slowly up the stairs, carrying his baseball bat in his right hand and the flashlight in his left. At the top of the stairs, there was another door leading into the apartment above Polcari's. Lucas peeked through the keyhole, trying to use the afternoon sun coming in through the apartment windows to see if it was safe to enter. It wasn't anything he saw, but rather something he smelled that confirmed the suspicion he had when he first entered the abandoned grocery store. No one had ever fled in a panic from Polcari's. As soon as things went south 3 years ago, not a single person had entered the charming grocery store on Lewis Road, nor left it. And Lucas could smell the person who never left. The living room above Polcari's looked as if it were sealed in epoxy resin, like a time capsule of how everything was before. Same with the kitchen and bathroom. It had been a long time since Lucas had seen someone's house in such pristine condition. The odor from something that looked like a home office hinted that this room wasn't in the same pristine state as the others. Lucas didn't have to use his flashlight anymore, as the warm sunlight brightened up the room for him. In the middle of it sat what Lucas figured must have been Mr. Polcari, or at least parts of him. The remains were badly burned, lying in what looked to be a state-of-the-art gaming chair. In front of it, a laptop. Around the badly burned body and chair were several empty plastic cans of paraffin, and even more full cans of the same flammable substance. In over his 3 years of entering countless houses, apartments, and establishments in Healdsburg, Lucas had developed a skill of reading and interpreting the rooms left behind, like those master detectives in TV shows who could solve any crime placed in front of them just by taking everything in. In this case, Lucas could see what had happened to Antonio Polcari as clear as day, like he was Sherlock Holmes himself standing there. Everything started at around 1:30 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 years ago. Antonio would most likely have heard screams and possibly cars crashing at 1:30, or maybe a minute after. He was probably just finishing up restocking the aisles of the store he was so proud of. He would have gone outside, or maybe just looked through the windows and quickly concluded that it was best to lock the door. After staring at the highly abnormal events taking place on Lewis Road, he probably ran up, startled, to his apartment, opened his laptop, and went to his go-to website for news updates. Sometime before the internet was history, which happened around 1:41 p.m., Antonio realized that he was in deep trouble, and probably more trouble than his fiberglass door and barred windows were able to handle. Still, Lucas believed that Mr. Polcari tried to stay alive for some time after 1:41 p.m. that Thursday. It's hard to say exactly how long he lasted, but at some point, while looking down at the streets from his apartment, Antonio probably saw one of them. At first, the screaming and car crashes, and people in panic. wouldn't really make any sense before you could really see one of the reasons behind all the screams with your own eyes. In a heightened state of panic and intense fear, Antonio decided to end it before they were able to. The choice of paraffin was indeed brutal, but Lucas had seen worse. And he probably intended to take the building with him, something he clearly didn't succeed in. Antonio's tragic ending saddened Lucas. It wasn't something he was completely immune to, even after seeing countless similar last chapter scenes as Mr. Polcari's. He put the 2 full cans into the remaining space in his backpack. The rest of the cans on Polcari's office floor would probably last until December or January. A good find indeed. There was still enough daylight to go to the next location Lucas had in mind, Midtown Comics. It was fairly close by, probably just 15 minutes away on his bike. Midtown Comics was Lucas's favorite comic book store from before everything went down, and one of their most prized items was a Starman The Mist Special Edition, the last item on today's to-do list. Midtown Comics was close, yes, but also closer to a much more dangerous part of Healdsburg. He hadn't encountered any of them for over a year now, and he didn't plan to do so today either. Last time was close. Way too close. As he approached the comic store, Lucas made sure to be as silent as possible and to proceed towards the iconic store from an angle where he could see most of its surroundings. It did seem safe. The comic store was not in the same condition as Polcari's. Even though comics, games, and Pokemon cards weren't the first things you needed after hell broke loose, it looked like the place was stormed and looted like every other building in town. With absolutely zero lockpicking skills needed this time, Lucas entered through one of the several shattered windows. Once inside, he navigated towards the centered island of a counter on the first floor of Midtown Comics. The middle part of the island had a tall glass display case with the more valuable items and playing cards inside. From how the cards were arranged, Lucas could see that one was clearly more valuable than the others. PSA 10 Red Cheek Pikachu, the somewhat childish card said. Lucas never collected Pokemon cards, but he'd seen this one in a YouTube video way back. He thought, why not, and tucked the card inside one of his pockets, while his eyes scanned the rest of the display, looking for a turquoise comic with the white letters that spelled out The Mist. And there it was. It wasn't placed in a position that indicated it was the most valuable of the chosen comics for the counter display. Some X-Men and Flash comics were towering at the top, clearly exhibiting their place in the hierarchy above Starman. But Lucas didn't really care for X-Men and Flash. Plus, the toned-down placement of the Mist made it easier for him to get it down from the display. He would have needed a ladder to access X-Men #1 at the top. The Mist looked as good as he imagined it to be. He'd only seen it pictured in other magazines and never in real life until now. Or he might have, on his weekly visits to Midtown before, but at the time he wasn't really the Starman fanboy he was now. The last 5% of his backpack was taken up by the comic enclosed in a UV plastic sleeve. That was 3 things off his to-do list, and Lucas knew he would be able to enjoy the recently accumulated comic this evening, with fuel for his oil lamp, accompanied by his favorite chocolate. As Lucas stepped on his bike, ready to go back home to safety, he heard the sound his ears and mind were always on the alert for. A noise coming from one of them. A gargle so recognizable Lucas could pick it up from a long distance. So hideous that he could understand why Antonio Polcari did what he did. But this wasn't from a distance. It was so close that Lucas knew he couldn't even turn around to orient himself. The only thing he should and could do to possibly survive was to pedal for his life. The first 2 steps on the pedals were so forceful they pulled the bike chain off the gears, like the bike was gasping for air after the shock of being woken up. If the chain wouldn't jump back onto the gears, Lucas would be forced to face the thing behind him, something he wasn't prepared for. He stepped once more on the right pedal and could feel the chain landing back into where they belonged, and he could swear the bike took off in the same tempo as his 250 dirt bike would do. He could hear the noises of it behind him, the gargle and the footsteps. Lucas navigated the streets in a violent manner to be as unpredictable as he could, everything to get away from what was chasing him. He knew he and his bike were fast enough as long as he did everything right. As the buildings got lower and smaller, and he was getting close to the outskirts of Healdsburg, he dared to look back at the thing hunting him. Lucas had gained a 200-yard distance from it, and he realized the immediate danger was over. It couldn't catch up with him at this point, and the only thing Lucas had to make sure of now was that no one would follow him back home to Castle Jack. Drenched in sweat, and still breathing like he had a near-death asthma attack, Lucas parked his bike in the shed. He was never really much into adrenaline rushes before, and now he hated them. They were synonymous with danger, and nothing of a reminder that his existence only consisted of small breaks with comics and Reese's Pieces before it was back to pure, simple survival again. Once again, it was too close, and he didn't like it. It took some time to calm down from the events in Healdsburg. The newly acquired comic book did indeed help, and the magnificent combination of chocolate and peanut butter contributed to something that felt like a normal resting heart rate. Tomorrow would be a resting day. Maybe, if he felt like it, he'd try to catch a California golden trout in the river. They would go well with some canned green beans and some sweet corn. The remaining supplies at Polcari's could wait. He had locked the door behind him, and he was the only person with a covert tubular lockpick in the area. That he was sure about. He was starting to feel drowsy. Lucas blew out the flame from the oil lamp and zipped up his sleeping bag. Then he heard something. Not the sound that they made, but it was the second sound he didn't want to hear today. It was the jingle bell ornaments above the door, leading into his safe place, in a vulnerable state, tucked inside a sleeping bag, in a dark room. It couldn't be another human, and it couldn't be an animal. Or it could, but Lucas wouldn't bet his life on it. The only explanation was that the creature chasing him earlier that day had been able to follow him all the way back to Castle Jack. Lucas was confident he was able to lose it by using the route he always did, but he was as confident now that it was about to enter his treetop house, and he was even more confident he wouldn't be able to win against the creature while lying in bed inside a sleeping bag. It was about half a year ago Lucas came up with the idea of a fourth way of exiting his elevated shelter. Close encounters inside the city had taught him that escapes came in handy when dealing with things that spent all their time and energy on trying to kill and devour anything in front of them. He knew it wasn't many seconds before it was able to get close enough to attack. Panicked, he was able to free one arm from his tightly zipped sleeping bag and pull a lever right next to his bed. The wooden bottom of his bed split open as Lucas pulled the homemade lever all the way towards him. What followed next was about 30 feet of free fall. Going down vertically with his back first wasn't Lucas's favorite way of leaving his bed, but at least he knew he could trust the pile of old mattresses strategically placed under the house to catch him. He was almost able to peel off the sleeping bag in the air as he bounced off the mattresses, and not more than 5 seconds after he pulled the lever with his bed, he was on his feet walking towards the stairs leading up to his house. Lucas was calmer now, and he knew he had to keep collected to be able to pull off what he intended. But as he walked up the stairs, he could feel the rage entering his body. The rage of being taken by surprise in the only place he should be able to feel completely safe. The rage of being attacked when he was at his most vulnerable. He needed the calmness, but he also needed the rage. Another lever was on the right side of the stairs leading up to the treetop house. As he turned it, a set of large industrial lamps brightened up the whole house. It was almost even more light than the sun could produce at its peak. Lucas had been able to collect a large number of car batteries to power the lights and some other things that drew electricity when he needed it. But they were difficult to charge, so he only used them on rare occasions, and this was a special occasion indeed. Lucas had also placed various weapons hidden around his property, and as he stepped off the last part of the stairs, he was holding on to a K-25 Great Hunter machete. He could hear the sound coming from the creature again. It sounded just like the one Lucas had encountered earlier today, and it filled him up with the last bits of rage he needed to feel like he was invincible. Inside the house, the creature stood in the middle of the room, equally stunned as it was aggressive. Stunned by the massive flood of lights and the fact that its prey had magically disappeared in front of it and reappeared behind it. Aggressive for the same reasons. Lucas swung his heavy machete, led by all the anger and hatred he had towards the creature standing in front of him. This was his second time in close combat with one of them. The first time wasn't easy, and Lucas almost came out of it as the losing party. But this time, the perfect angled machete combined with the adrenaline pumping through Lucas's body made it look like a samurai demonstrating a freshly sharpened katana sword going through a line of rolled-up tatami mats. One slice, and it was over. The body of the creature fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Its head flew through the air and disappeared down the bed hatch that Lucas escaped through roughly 30 seconds ago. Lucas 1, ugly creature making hideous noises, 0. The adrenaline escaped Lucas's body as fast as it had entered him, and Lucas collapsed on the floor of his treetop house. He needed to sleep. Now. The next day was spent cleaning up and resetting everything from what had occurred the night before. Lucas also took his bike and trailer back to Pocari's to collect as many supplies as possible. He originally intended to wait, but the attack last night had woken up the prepper inside him. He filled up the trailer and backpack with as much food and paraffin as he could. On his way home, he also stopped by Midtown Comics again. He needed a new comic book series to collect. He thought he'd seen a full collection of Black Jack, a Japanese manga from the 70s and 80s, behind the counter. He had read a couple of them way back, and he knew it was something he could get into. Killing one of them equaled at least 10 items off his to-do list, which meant binge reading comics and 2 or 3 too many Reese's whilst doing so. Lucas finally felt safe again, and it was time for some much-needed time off.